TFA fam, welcome back in. Going to be hitting you all with the start sit show for wide receivers this week. Going to be talking about some of my favorite and least favorite matchups among wide receivers. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. Going to kick things off on a negative note and talk about some of the guys I'd be looking to sit or just some of the guys that I feel are in unfavorable matchups this week. To start with Amari Cooper, who has been freed from that ugly situation in Cleveland. The Amari Cooper owners are definitely out here doing cartwheels, singing hallelujah. This is not the week, though. I'm pumping the brakes here. The Titans are giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Now, this is a defense that hasn't exactly been tested through the first 5 weeks, but I do think L'Jarius Sneed is a dog. I think that's who Cooper is going to be lined up against. This is obviously going to be his first game in this new offense as well. So in my rankings, I have Cooper more as like a wide receiver 3/flex play. Better days are definitely ahead where I'm going to be putting Cooper as a wide receiver 2, maybe even a back end wide receiver 1. But week 7 is not one of those weeks. The Jets and the Steelers are playing each other this week. Both of these teams have limited production of wide receivers. The Jets are giving up the fourth fewest half PPR points per game to wide receivers. The Steelers have allowed the 10th fewest. I don't want anything to do with Russell Wilson in this game. Sounds like he's going to be getting his first start. Pickens is the only guy that we are interested in with the Steelers. I'm absolutely sitting him in his debut here going up against the Jets. On the flip side, Devontae Adams is the only guy that I am interested in. Theoretically, this should be a good thing for Garrett Wilson in terms of the coverage he's going to see, in terms of the matchups he's getting. But for week 7, I think Rodgers comes out and just absolutely peppers Devontae Adams with double-digit targets. So there's going to be a week where I'm going to sit Garrett Wilson if you are able to. Another matchup featuring two of these top defenses in terms of limiting production to wide receivers is going to be the Chiefs and the Niners. The Chiefs have allowed the 7th fewest, and the 49ers have allowed the 12th fewest. I think you can consider sitting Brandon Ayuk in this one. Ayuk has just one wide receiver 1 finish on the year. Every other week has been wide receiver 40 or worse. The most concerning part here with Ayuk is the fact that he just simply hasn't been getting targeted at the same clip that he was last year. He's seen 5 or fewer targets in 4 of 6 games this year. The Chiefs also run man coverage at the 8th highest rate, and Ayuk has just a 0.21 fantasy points per route run against man coverage this year. And among wide receivers with at least 100 routes run, that ranks him outside of the top 50. On the flip side, with the Chiefs, Juju is going to be a wide receiver 3 for me, and Xavier Worthy is a boom bust flex play. Christian Kirk is a guy who I'm avoiding in my lineups if possible, not necessarily because of the matchup here, but because of the return of Evan Ingram. In the games where Ingram has been healthy and you also have a legit wide receiver running routes alongside Christian Kirk, Kirk's production just has not been the same. Frankly, he hasn't been great this year anyway, even when Ingram was out. So Kirk is going to be making the sit list. I did just want to mention Cooper Kupp, not necessarily a straight up sit for me, but I did just want to pump the brakes on him a little bit. It sounds like there's potential that he could come back for week 7. I'm not worried about the matchup at all. The Raiders have technically given up the 9th fewest points per game to wide receivers. It has nothing to do with the matchup. I just feel like it would probably be smart for the Rams to work Kupp in more slowly if he does come back. So I think we could see him rotated out more than we are used to seeing him. If you have him, you probably have to play him. But if you have someone who you feel better about, I would go ahead and plug them in. Lastly, the Seahawks may show up as a red matchup in your fantasy app of choice when you're looking at guys like Drake London and Darnell Mooney. But I'm not shying away from those guys this week, especially if Tariq Woolen is forced to miss another week. He missed last week with an ankle injury. Even if he plays, you're still putting Drake London in your lineup. The dude has been wide receiver 18 or better in 4 of his last 5. He has at least 6 catches for 50 yards and a score in 4 of those last 5 matchups as well. And he has 35 targets over the past 3 weeks. You're not seeing that type of usage and production despite what looks like a tougher matchup on paper. Moving it on over to the positive side, we do have 3 games this week featuring teams that are letting up production to the wide receivers. I'm going to start off with those matchups in particular. Kicking things off is going to be the Ravens versus the Bucks. This is a situation where you're starting all your guys I would pay attention to the injury report this week for Mike Evans. Got banged up early in the game last week and rotated in and out way more than we're used to seeing. I think in super deep leagues, you could even consider Sterling Shepard, who appears to have taken advantage of the injuries ahead of him and now looks like he has a lock on that wide receiver 3 role. And again, if Mike Evans were to be limited in this one for any reason, that would obviously open up some more looks for Sterling Shepard. On the Ravens side, Zay is obviously a must start, and you can consider Rashad Bateman as a wide receiver 3/flex play if you need to. Bateman does have 12 targets over the past 2 weeks. He has finished as wide receiver 17 and 34 in those two contests. He has a 13.4 average depth of target that ranks 17th among wide receivers, and the Bucks are tied for the second most completed air yards allowed. So this could be a spot where Bateman delivers. The Vikings and the Lions, this is another spot where you're starting all your dudes. The Vikings have allowed the third most points to opposing wideouts, and the Lions are allowing the fourth most. I obviously don't need to tell you to start Amon-Ra or Jefferson in this spot. Jameson Williams is also in play, and so is Jordan Addison. As I mentioned, the Lions are allowing the fourth most fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts, and that is with them only giving up 3 receiving touchdowns. This game has a over-under of 50, which is actually only the third highest on the week. Most importantly, both of these defense are absolute pass funnels. They're both strong on the ground and just get lit up in the passing game. The Lions have the 12th highest rate of targets going to outside wide receivers. And that is important for Addison here because despite his size, he just rarely gets moved to the slot. So there's going to be a good spot for Jordan Addison if you have to fire him up. The Commanders and Panthers is the third game and matchup that I wanted to talk about. Terry McLaurin, obviously a must start this week, but I also think you can look to Noah Brown, who returned last week from missing week 5, immediately jumped into a role where he saw a near 23% target share. That actually led the Commanders last week. I'd feel better about Brown if Brian Robinson were forced to miss again, but even still, this game has the highest over-under on the week at 51.5. Definitely did not have a Washington-Carolina matchup as any week to have the highest total on my bingo card, but here we are. On the flip side, you're obviously starting Deontay Johnson, but Xavier Legette is in the discussion as well, someone who deserves to be mentioned as a start for week 7. Legette has scored a touchdown in 2 of his 3 last games. We're only a few games removed from him seeing 10 targets as well. The Commanders are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to wideouts, and I think for those in super deep leagues, this isn't a consideration for 12-team leagues or anything like that. But if you're in like a 16-team league or something like that, or you just have like deep starting requirements, I think you can look at undrafted rookie Jalen Coker for the Panthers. Coker has taken over the wide receiver 3 spot for Carolina and has looked good over the past couple of weeks. Some other plus matchups I want to hit on real quick. The Patriots are going to be traveling to London to take on the Jags, who have allowed the second most points per game to opposing wide receivers. Now, I don't want to try and have some set in stone takeaways just from one start with Drake May, but if I had to start Demario Douglas in this one, I really don't think it's a bad play in terms of a flex option. Last week, Demario saw 9 targets, which was far and away the most on the team, 24% target share. No other player on the team had more than 5 targets. The best indicator here for May and why I think you can look to some of the Patriots passing game is the fact that the Jags are a bottom 10 team in terms of generating pressure. And they've also only forced 3 turnovers, which is tied for the 3rd fewest across the league. I also think this puts someone like Jalen Polk in play, but I feel like Douglas is the best bet. The Cardinals are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. You can look to Ladd McConkey here as a flex level play. He is 17th in target share, 12th in target rate per player profiler. He has at least 6 targets in all but 1 game this year. He has to score to get you really excited about his fantasy production, but that is certainly in the cards here going up against Arizona, who has allowed 8 through the air so far to opposing wideouts. That trails only the Commanders, Ravens, Panthers, and Texans. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have been unstartable since Tua went down, even though he's not coming back this week. A matchup against the Colts defense is good news for that entire offense. Indy is allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. That also includes the 5th most points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And with having a bye week to hopefully get Huntley more comfortable in this offense, allow time for McDaniels to change things up to help Huntley out a little bit more. Both Hill and Waddle can be plugged into your lineups this week. Obviously, with the caveat and knowing going into it that their ceilings aren't going to be as high without Tua in the fold. Last thing I wanted to hit on, two middle of the road teams, Texans and Panthers. For Houston, you feel better about Dell after he finally got off the schneid last week. You're plugging Diggs in. And on the Packers side, we need to see what happens with Jaden Reed's practice report. He got banged up last week. He did come back into the game, but was not used as much as he typically would be. I'm assuming he's going to play in this one, but if he's out or if we hear that he's going to be limited for whatever reason, Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson immediately both jump up rankings to fringe wide receiver 2 status.